Ready to go now.
Wonderful. This is the extraordinary meeting of the Council on the 9th of February 2021, held via remote technology. I now hand you over to our Chief Executive Officer, Dr. Rosemary Dillon.
Thank you, Storm. Good evening, councillors, staff and Blue Mountains community. Welcome to this extraordinary meeting of the Blue Mountains City Council. This meeting is being recorded and will be live streamed. An audio file and a link to a live stream is available from the Council's website. The audio recording will be available on the Council's website for 6 months after the upload date. As all statements made at this meeting will be recording your image and voice, note that they may be recognised by other people and other people may be aware that you have attended the meeting. So your continued attendance at the meeting after this statement is made is taken as your consent to your image and voice being webcast. All persons in attendance at this meeting, whether addressing the Council or making comments that may be detected by the recording equipment, should refrain from making any defamatory comments or from releasing any personal or confidential information about another individual without the other individual's consent. The Council is not responsible for the statements of any individual made during this meeting. Any defamatory statements or any statements which include personal or confidential information are the sole responsibility of the individual who makes them. The Council's Code of Meeting Practice sets standards of conduct for a Council meeting. If any person in attendance at the meeting acts in a disorderly manner, or if a person makes defamatory or unacceptable comments, then the meeting may be interrupted by the Mayor or by me, the Chief Executive Officer, and appropriate action taken. This meeting must not be recorded by any party other than the Council. Members of the public have been invited to provide submissions to the item on the meeting agenda in advance. Any submissions received have been provided to the councillors. I ask you to please welcome the Mayor.
Dear God, we sincerely seek your blessing on this council so that its deliberations may advance your glory and the true welfare of the people of the City of Blue Mountains. The City of Blue Mountains is located within the country of the Darug and Gundungurra peoples. The Blue Mountains City Council recognises that Darug and Gundungurra traditional owners have a continuous and deep connection to their country, and that this is of great cultural significance to Aboriginal people both locally and in the region. For Darug and Gundungurra people, Ungara takes in everything within the physical, cultural and spiritual landscape: landforms, waters, air, trees, rocks, plants, animals, foods, medicines, minerals, stories and special places. It includes cultural practice, kinship, knowledge, songs, stories and art, as well as spiritual beings and people, past, present and future. Blue Mountain City Council pays respects to elders past and present, while recognising the strength, capacity and resilience of past and present Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the Blue Mountains region. There are no apologies for this meeting. Are there any declarations of interest? There are no declarations. I'll move on to the mayoral matters of urgency. The first one's moved me and seconded the Deputy Mayor. I think it's important that we note the current state of the Explorers Tree near Medlow Bath. It's important for us in even the most casual examination, adding to that the briefing we've had about the state of the tree, to be very clear that there is an imminent risk of failure. There's an imminent risk that the tree or the structure around it could give way and fall into the highway corridor. Very importantly, of course, the tree is of historical significance, and we might start the timer on me. The tree is of historical significance as well, and its loss would be something that would be more than noteworthy. We need to understand that the risk of failure attaches very much to the current structure, and we need also to be very clear that there's been lengthy correspondence between the Council and Transport for New South Wales on this matter, and that correspondence between us has taken place over a long period of time, because the highway corridor sits within the jurisdiction of the New South Wales Government and not Council. The Council has been very clear in its briefings to us that the New South Wales Government, through Transport for New South Wales, controls that highway corridor, and that council would require their approval to conduct any work at all within that corridor, including on the tree. So this mayoral minute calls on Transport for New South Wales to take urgent action to make sure that the safety of road users is locked in and ensured. Should the asset fail, the potential for an accident is very obvious. Not only that, but of course we want to secure the asset itself. In this mayoral minute, I make it very clear that officers have developed, our officers have developed and submitted a design for retaining the structure to the New South Wales Government for their consideration, and that we have as a council requested permission to install this structure, and that permission has not yet been granted by the New South Wales Government. To that end, the mayoral minute seeks to write relevant correspondence to relevant ministers to try to get these measures in place to protect the community and to protect the asset. Councillors, I and the staff do fear that the risk of failure of that asset could be imminent. You can see what would happen if it fell. There'd be the usual action from the state government to try and confuse jurisdiction so that they could avoid blame. The fact of the matter is we can't secure that asset or do any work on it until we have the approval of the state government, which is pending. Correspondence between the council and the state government has been lengthy. This is a high-risk a high-risk issue. It needs to be attended to immediately. The New South Wales Government needs to take this matter very seriously. I submit that at this stage they're not, and this mayoral minute will, I hope, be a wake-up call to urgent action. Does the seconder wish to speak? The Deputy Mayor.
No, thank you, Mr. Mayor. You've said it all.
Thank you, Mr. Deputy Mayor. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Brown.
I will be supporting this, but at risk of the opprobrium of my colleagues on the Heritage Advisory Committee, I actually think it should just be removed. I don't, it's not a tree, it's not even a stump. It's actually a lump of concrete with some wood shards on it. You don't need to be a botanist, but a very senior botanist at Botanic Gardens has confirmed that that tree did not, if it existed in 1813, it couldn't have been sat under, it could only have been sat on, it would have been 2 inches high. So its value is held by heritage experts to be actually in the meaning that's given to it rather than any reality of it. And I have to say that there's been a very good interpretation done with our staff and the Aboriginal Advisory Committee at Pulpit Hill there about the significance of the tree and the significance of the site. The whole area is very significant as a stopover point. And it seems also a cemetery, a sort of a roadside cemetery for people who died, on the way. So it does have significance, but that lump of concrete, I think, we can all see it's dangerous. I just feel, aside from anything else, which has already been hit once or twice, even if it's shored up at considerable expense, it's still a very hittable obstacle right on the edge of the road. So I said, I know that this is not, I'm not putting up an amendment because there's so much heritage debate around this, but my personal feeling is actually it should be moved, and that's what they should do. If they want to move it and put it somewhere else, fine. The site itself is significant, and that's what needs interpretation, not the lump. Anyway, that's my personal view. I will support this motion as it stands. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. And to assist the meeting, you'll notice that the resolution focuses very much on the safety of the site. I take Councillor Brown's points. Any other debate or discussion? I don't think there is any. There's one matter before us. I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? I'll declare it carried unanimously. The second mayoral matter of urgency is moved me and seconded Councillor Fernanda, and I'll speak to it. Councillors, before I do, and the clock should start, I do want to say that I'm going to say some harsh things about the government, and I'll make it very clear that the comments I make today do not extend to the two Liberal councillors on this council. Despite what their party is doing at the state level, they have worked with us as a team throughout, and I want to publicly acknowledge that none of my comments tonight extend in any way to either of those two councillors. I sat in the parliamentary inquiry yesterday and I listened to the Deputy Premier, and I couldn't have been more disillusioned. Let me take you through the facts. In about June last year, the CEO of the council received a phone call from the New South Wales government, from a public servant, asking whether, if the council had funds, there were shovel-ready projects it would spend them on. It was a rather informal approach. Dialogue continued thereafter, and the council, in concert with that dialogue, submitted some 24 proposals worth about 5.4 million in the form of a prospectus. And I will ask the CEO after this debate if she'll put that prospectus on the website. That prospectus was submitted, and the CEO made 3 follow-up calls to the New South Wales government to see how those funding applications were being viewed. At no time was the CEO told there were any criteria, simply that this was being worked through and that they were seeking shovel-ready projects. Yesterday, I heard the Deputy Premier say that our projects weren't shovel-ready. The staff will confirm to you that that is not true. Yesterday, the Deputy Premier said that projects had to be worth over $1 million. Well, interestingly, the New South Wales government has funded a number of projects under $1 million. So clearly that is not true. And the New South Wales government said that our projects didn't meet their criteria. What criteria? No criteria was put to us. And in the follow-up calls made by the CEO, none was expressed. What's also noteworthy about that first round of BLUR funding, bushfire funding, is that very little of it went to other than coalition seats. Labor seats, Green seats and Shooters Party seats were almost all but ignored. Interestingly, there was a small amount of funding given to a Labor seat, Cessnock, and guess what? It was worth less than $1 million. So, that criterion that was so important goes out the window. I spoke last night to the chair of the parliamentary inquiry and he indicated to me that the criteria that the Deputy Premier tabled was in fact just his speaking notes or his briefing notes. No criteria has yet surfaced. The simple fact is the Blue Mountains was significantly impacted by fire. Whether business was directly impacted or not, the fact that tourists couldn't travel to a tourist destination for quite a long time because of fires, obviously is going to impact its economic viability. Homes were lost in the Blue Mountains. Citizens went through the terror of a bushfire emergency. Fire crews went out day after day, night after night, week after week, month after month, and confronted the terror of the Black Summer fires. 70% of our World Heritage listed, our World Heritage area, 70% of our World Heritage area was impacted by those fires. It is unbelievable that none of our projects, not one, would have met with no approval. What's interesting is how we found out about the non-approval of our projects through the media. The government didn't even have the good graces to call us and let us know. I want to call a spade a spade. What's happened here is that the New South Wales government has fundamentally let down the Blue Mountains. I hope we're lucky in the second round, but that will be 18 months after the fires have gone through. Businesses have gone to the wall in that time. But make no mistake, the New South Wales government has, with this first round of funding, betrayed our community, and it is unacceptable, the excuses they put forward for that betrayal. We need to press this issue. We need to write to the government and challenge that decision. And we need to make sure that we find some redress for our community. It's our job to advocate for them, to advocate loudly, and not to make excuses for a government that, in my opinion, and my respectful submission to you, has done the wrong thing by our city. Thank you. Does the seconder, Councillor Fernanda, wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. I think we all share your sentiments, and you so rightly put and summarised the effects and the trauma that was bestowed upon our community. I think we're all in shock and gobsmacked as a community to have no funding. I actually think it's the biggest slap in the face and the greatest insult to the Blue Mountains. And when I think, as you put it, that when you look at the weeks, the months that our emergency services spent defending our towns, our community, property, our natural environment, and majority of those people actually live in the mountains. They are our community. They're the ones that went out fighting day in, day out, and their families supporting them. And to have this thrown in our faces that we're not worthy or we don't meet a so-called criteria, I think is the greatest insult to all the emergency service people and our community as well. Once again, I'm just lost for words with this state government. I think it's absolutely disgraceful. There is no excuse whatsoever. If they're talking about a criteria, will you come and stand out and look at them? You come and look at how much has been burnt. Come and speak to the residents, walk in their shoes, go to the people who lost their properties, walk down the main street of any of our towns and ask the businesses what impact had the fires had upon you. Maybe then we'll meet a criteria. But if they say that there's no criteria met, well, they're blind as anything. And I am so disgraced at how we've been just swept under the carpet. And same with actually when you look at the Central Coast and Ballina too. No excuse. I'm so upset with this. And I know that every councillor here too as well. And as you said, you know, this isn't a reflection on our Liberal councillors either when I say this. But this state government is the most disgraceful government if it can look at our community in the face and say that we're not worthy of any funding. Anyway, that's all I have to say. I think you said it all in your statement as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fernanda. The Deputy Mayor has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I totally agree with what has just been said, especially what you just said. I was one of those firefighters that went out, like many others of firefighters here in the Blue Mountains, that went up north and south to fight fires everywhere during this very difficult time. And then we had people from other areas come up into here. But the business community, the tourism, you know, we were hit so hard. And these projects were covered right across the Blue Mountains. That, like you said, there were over 20 of them, and we got absolutely nothing. And I don't know whether it was the National Party that pushed this all through, but Barilaro's behaviour just recently is absolutely disgusting, and that's one of the reasons I left the Liberal Party, because you know, they are just. Look, I just cannot describe how I feel about this. We've been left in the lurch again, and I totally support this. And you know, just disgusting. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you, Deputy Mayor. Can I just acknowledge not only your fire service, but also your long service on the Bushfire Management Committee, and thank you very much for that at this time. I'll call on another firefighter, Councillor Romola Hollywood.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor, for bringing forward this mayoral matter of urgency. I just want to begin by saying these are some of the words that I've seen on Facebook from our community, and I want to bring them into this space. Unimaginable, disgraceful, shocking, scandalous, shonky, horrendous, rotten, outrageous, maddening, unbelievable. These are just some of the repeatable words. There were others that I won't repeat here, that our community has used to describe how they feel about the fact that the New South Wales government chose not to allocate any funding to us for bushfire recovery. We know, as the Mayor has said, that people, businesses and the environment were hit hard during the Black Summer bushfires. I think of the Facebook posts during the Black Summer fires of businesses crying out for the fact that they didn't have customers, that they needed support. And this was pre-COVID. There was no job keeper or job seeker programs in place. We were on our own. We saw pledges of funding, but nothing has been delivered. It's absolutely inexplicable that we didn't receive any funding to support our recovery, but also to build our resilience in the face of future fires. And you have to wonder, in fact, whether the New South Wales government's decision is actually bordering on negligence. We are one of the most bushfire-prone cities in the world. Let's not forget that. And the projects, when you see the list, and I encourage community members to read that list, you can see that they are projects that really are embedded and close to the kinds of things that we know that we need to do to make our communities safer. To see that there's, and I'll just talk briefly about Ward 2, to see that there was a project put up around a link road in Hazelbrook to make it safer to escape and to move about the community. To see that there are modest projects around improving toileting facilities in the bushfire stations, both at Mount Riverview and also at Woodford. And I've used those toilets at Woodford, and I know that they are do need an upgrade. It's absolutely extraordinary that we have been overlooked. In fact, it would seem to be sheer bloody mindedness. I just do not understand how the government can explain this away. So, Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you for bringing forward the Mayoral Minute, but also for all your work responding to the media inquiries. This is a major, major story and a major, major issue, not just for our community, but for the other communities that missed out on bushfire recovery funding. I also want to acknowledge the work of Trish Doyle and Susan Templeman, and most particularly the members of the Upper House inquiry who are investigating this matter. It is absolutely important that we get to the bottom of what actually took place. Where is this criteria that's been bandied about? The government absolutely must be held to account on this matter. So thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Hollywood. And just watching the committee work yesterday, I'd like to acknowledge the opposition members present, but also the chair, David Shoebridge, with whom I had a conversation last night, for the forensic way that he's gone about examining this issue. And we owe those three MPs, the two Labor MPs and Mr Shoebridge, a debt of gratitude, I think. Any further comments? Councillor Hua, do you wish to speak?
Yes, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I don't know that I can add much more other than my sense of visceral outrage and astonishment at the way this government has behaved in discharging its functions, the way they have sought to normalise the misappropriation of public funds. Let's call it for what it is. It's one thing for our state political leaders to make fun of rorting and try and normalise it and say, well, that's what everybody does all the time. But it is misappropriation. It is unfair and unfounded and utterly unworthy of the offices to which they have been elected. I would just like to emphasise the comments of my colleagues to reflect the seething anger that I sense out in the community. And I wish to thank you, Mr. Mayor, for an absolutely stellar performance across so many media platforms in the last few days. I think you have done our community proud in giving voice to the anger and the resentment that is felt by all of our community, those impacted by the fires, those like myself who served day after day after day in our area and in other areas, twice to our north. To be disrespected like this by a state government is I think unheralded in the state's history. I don't think I'm over egging the pudding to say that the contempt with which the state government has treated fire-affected communities in electorates outside of their what they regard as their turf is just astonishing. It's without precedent, and I urge the community to maintain the rage, to not forget that they have been absolutely betrayed by the lack of assistance after one of the most significant disasters in our history. And there will be more. And can we expect the same treatment the next time? Maybe just next year or the year after that, when we have the next big fire event, climate change induced fire event? Do we expect to get nothing from the state government? Friends, there is only one way that this problem can be resolved, and that is at the ballot box.
Thank you, Councillor Hua. Any further speeches? Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I spent 60 years of my adult life engaged in politics and in civil life, and I can endorse Councillor Hua's statement that this is the most appalling government and the appalling mismanagement of community funds that I've ever come across. There's been more corrupt governments, I'll give you that. Robin Askin's government was a standout, of course, but in simple terms of political rorting, this takes the cake. If you add it, if you combine it with the rorting of the amalgamated councils funding, that's nearly that's in the vicinity of $400 million that have been put to political purposes by this government. And at a time when the communities come together, when firefighters have gone out and fought fires, when nurses and doctors and health workers and cleaners and all sorts of people have acknowledged and acted in the civic, in the public's best interest by mask wearing, by working in dangerous conditions, those sorts of things, is in stark contrast to this appalling government. Thanks.
Thank you. Councillor Fell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I don't wish to say a great deal more, but just to join the others in thanking you for the work that you've been doing on the media. And I've been fortunate enough to have been able to follow some of that. And I'd also pass on that people have, as Councillor Hollywood has indicated, people have actually stopped me in the street to comment on that. And of course, to comment on the flip side of it, the reason for it, which is the appalling behaviour of the state government in the face of these bushfires. And I'd take people's minds back, this is the only thing I can add, I think, to 2013. When Councillor Hua says, I hope this doesn't happen again, my reply is, well, if past performance is any guide to future behaviour, you know, I don't really hold out a great deal of hope. And I say that with deep regret, because I was very close to the 2013 bushfire recovery process. I know how badly people felt about that. And I know that at one stage there, where we were up till then, the worst loss of houses in a bushfire that occurred in Winmalee, when we lost 200 houses, a $6 million cleanup program was not funded by the state government, even when the federal government offered 50% of funding, offered to put in $3 million out of the $6 million. Still didn't happen. It was left for the residents of Winmalee to sort it out with their own insurance companies and just do the best that they could, and to put up with the effects of the houses, the burnt down houses being all around them, the asbestos in the air, the whole lot. That betrayal, I think, was as great in some ways as the betrayal that we're undergoing now. And I would also echo your point that it's not the quality of the submissions that's in doubt whatsoever. It's nothing to do with whether the project was shovel ready or not. Never has been in 2013 or in this instance. It's nothing to do with them being shovel ready. It's nothing to do with whether they're $1 million in value for an individual project or not. I fail to see why that has any impact whatsoever when you put in for $5 million worth of funding. Who cares whether it's in 20 bundles or whether it's in 5 bundles? The money still has to be spent. All good projects, but all just avoided by people like Barilaro, just coming up with different reasons, different rationales for why we shouldn't get funding. So I just say, look, it's shades of 2013, and quite frankly, as far as the suite of submissions that we put in, the prospectus, quite frankly, I doubt that it was even read. So I'll just leave it at that.
Thank you, Councillor Fell. Any further comments? Councillor Brown.
Well, first of all, I'd like to also acknowledge the incredible work of David Shoebridge, MLC, the Greens MLC, who really has spearheaded this and uncovered it. Mr. Shoebridge is very good at focusing on something and then researching it and getting the evidence. So I acknowledge fully this wouldn't have happened without him. I just want to, what I have noticed, everyone's not talking about what's happening now, because what's actually come out of that, he's been on this for a while. This second round of Blur is very different. It's extremely different. It was really, really rigorous, very clear guidelines. I was involved in various ways with a number of the applications, so I know the scale of work that was required. There was no questions about sort of what was expected to get funding, or also of the levels and the different levels going 400,000 up to 20 million. And that's why I've got an urgency motion up tonight, because what I think the difference now, I think, is this has called something out. It's called out a process that's now going to require this government, or any government in the future, I hope, to have as level as possible a playing field. I mean, that's difficult because obviously there's different resources for different councils. I also want to just say here that what I saw happen that did concern me in this last round is I was helped with a couple of the communities doing major work for council assets. So you've got community now doing the running, getting the professional expertise. You know, they're big. To do an application properly, not to pork barrel, but to do a real application takes a lot of resources. And so I think the council now has to put itself in a position where it is resourced to do that, because what I saw with this more recent round of Blur was that the council itself doesn't have the resources to do all the work that's required for these applications. And I actually think we do need to look at that, because David Shoebridge and his colleagues have created a situation where it's not now going to be okay to not take these applications, this process seriously. But I think we need to as well, because I am blown away by, with the Treeline Lurline project, the level of work that was done on that. Incredible expertise put in by engineers, planners, landscapers, all pro bono.
Councillor Brown, I might draw you to the motion before the council.
Well, what I'm saying is I support the motion, but I am talking to what I've heard and saying, I think we also need to realise now that that process has changed, and also to be a bit bolder. I actually think, because what happened with that last round is that Treeline Lurline project was actually not endorsed at first by the council for fear of it getting in the way of other ones. We actually have to now go for it across the board, encourage the community to be part of it, because that's our resource. But I also think, and I'm foreshadowing my motion on this, we need to actually resource someone to help with grant application writing for the staff, because it's such a big job. what we should have now in the future is a proper process by government. I think this is forcing it. And I think we need to be ready for that. And we need to support the community groups that do amazing work and will give so much time generously. And that I saw happen also with the Blackheath Area Neighbourhood Centre. They did a great job on that. So I do think we'll get some funding this time around. And I think that this scandal's probably helped that. I think it's, you know, it's pulled it out. It's pulled out the truth of these things. But I also want the council to realise it's not going to be the same now. And we need to resource application writing and really help it. Thank you.
And I'll ask the CEO to comment on that when the relevant motion's before us. All right, any further councillors wish to speak? Councillor Brown, if you could go on mute. Thank you for your contribution. Councillor Christie has the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will be quite brief. First of all, I did just want to thank you for your comments regarding the Liberal councillors and Councillor Fernanda as well. But I just also wanted to put it on the public record that, you know, a couple of these projects that missed out on funding were projects in my ward, in our ward, Mr. Mayor, including renovation of Mount River Fire Station. I am disappointed. I share the community's disappointment with the decision not to support for round one funding to come through to the Blue Mountains community. Myself and Councillor Schreiber, we both supported the projects for round one, and we'll be supporting round two as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Christie, and I acknowledge that it's my suspicion that when this is put to the vote, this council will be united on the issue. All councillors, I know, care passionately about this community. Any further contributions? There being none, there's one matter before us. It's not been spoken against. I'll put it. All those in favour? And I declare that carried with great thanks unanimously. Thank you, councillors. The next mayoral matter of urgency, and it shouldn't require much discussion, is moved by me and seconded by Councillor Christie. The project that is federally funded at Knapsack is probably worth a couple of $1 million now when you add state, federal and local funds into it. This motion simply seeks to reassure the community that the council is committed to meeting the timelines. There's some concern that there won't be a car park in place, the car park in place when the soccer season starts, and this motion reflects our determination that it will be. Can I just say I spoke to the club president today, and he acknowledged our project manager's communication with him and our project manager's preparedness to take phone calls. And I'd like to pass my thanks on to our project manager, who's looking after a hell of a lot at the moment, and thank him for being prepared to speak with stakeholders. But it's important that we reassure the community of the organisation's determination to complete this on time, but also to reassure the federal government, whose expectation is that this project will be delivered in time, the car park at least, for the commencement of the football season. They made it clear in the allocation of the funds that that was their expectation. Councillors Christie, Bowling and I are a unity ticket on this, as I know will the rest of the council be. Does the seconder wish to speak?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, I'll just speak briefly. I too spoke to the president of the club this morning, and very grateful for being able to work together on drafting this motion, working with you on this motion, Mr. Mayor.
Yes. And
I just want to reiterate that the president and the club have been very grateful of the project manager's communication with them. And this is a very important project to the Lower Mountains community, particularly the Blue Mountains Football Club community, but as well as the other community organisations that will benefit from this. The car park has been a safety issue and concern for some time, and it's great that we were able to get this federal funding to help us deliver this project. And with the impending football season, I'm just showing our support to the club that we are determined to get this done and get it done right just before football season without interrupting their season.
Thanks, Councillor Christie. I'll just ask Councillor Bowling if he wishes to speak on the matter.
No, I'm fine, thank you.
Thanks, Councillor Bowling. Any councillors in opposition? Councillor Brown, you wish to speak on the matter?
Yeah, I'm not quite in opposition, but I'm uncomfortable with it because I understand that our staff and our project managers will be doing this as best as they can, as fast as they can, as safely as they can, given all the loads they've had, all the drainage issues, all the, all the landslides and things. I mean, Lura Cascades is constantly people hassling about when that's going to be open again. So I'm a bit uncomfortable with this idea. I saw that we're just urging, because that's as far as I'll go. I'll support an urge, but I do feel that I trust that the director and staff are doing this as quickly and safely as they can. And we've all got projects that we think are really important. And so I'm not really keen on sort of pushing things forward, but I'll go along with the urging as opposed to instructing.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Brown. And of course, it would be out of order for us to instruct. So we've gone as far as we can. But thank you for your contribution. Any other contributions? There being none, there's one matter before us. I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried unanimously. We now move to item number 9, the former Katoomba Golf Clubhouse site classification. It's moved Councillor McGregor, seconded Councillor Vanderclay. Is there any one who wishes to speak to the matter? I'll just take the mover and seconder first. Does the mover yield for now? Mover is yielding, if I can read his lips. Seconder, do you yield or you wish to speak?
No, I don't wish to speak, Mr. Mayor.
Yield for now. Councillor Brown has the call.
Actually, it's more questions. I'm very unclear on this.
We'll go with questions, Councillor Brown. I'll take them through me one at a time. So the first question.
So the first question is this: that the classification is changing to operational. It's changing from community. I believe I'm correct in that understanding. Yes. It was community zoning. I'm unclear that we were able to sell. How were we able to sell community land and then buy it back? How is that possible?
I'll take that question to CEO.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Parsons or Mr. Tanvo.
Thank you, Mr. Parsons. Mr. Tanvo.
So in relation to the first question, so the land isn't currently, or wasn't when we purchased it, classified community. It's when the land transfers into council's ownership, it must decide whether it is going to classify the land community or operational land. In relation to the second question, I'd need to take the exact details of that on notice, but I imagine that would have, when it transferred to private ownership, which is where it was, that community title, if it was community classification rather, would have dropped away.
Yes.
Through you,
Thank you, Mr. Parsons.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and the CEO. Yes. The clubhouse site, basically when it was sold to Northern Holdings in the early 2000s, was classified as operational land. That's the only way that we could sell the land to Northern Holdings at the time. And now, after it's sold to private ownership, then the land was no longer classified as under the local government classification scheme. So as Mr. Parsons mentioned before, when we bought this land back in November, the land was not classified, and it is under the local government act. We are required to classify the land within 3 months after we bought the land, and that 3-month time frame is ended by the 12th of this Friday, the 12th of February this Friday.
I thank the officers for that response. Next question, Councillor Brown.
But the golf course land, I thought the golf course land was community land because it once was. So now I'm understanding that the golf course land is actually already classified as operational. Is that correct?
Is the golf course land operational through the CEO to the relevant staff?
Mr. Mayor, to Mr. Tanvo.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, and the CEO, that's correct. The golf course land in 1998 was reclassified as operational land through a very lengthy LEP process. and approved by state government and minister as well.
Okay, and that was when
Councillor Brown, direct your questions through me properly.
All right, yeah, I'm just trying to get a picture. I mean,
Question, just ask the question.
So the next question is, so the key reason, because looking at, I think it's the local government data, I forget which bit, but when we change something from community to operational, we have to be convinced that there's no further community benefit from it. This is coming down to how long the leases are. Is that right? This is the key issue, that we don't believe that 21 years, which is all we can do under community, is long enough. So that's
through the
key
CEO
reason.
to the relevant staff member.
Mr. Vogt.
Through you, to Mr. Mayor and CEO, the lease length, the length of the lease is only one example. However, in classifying the land as operational, it gives council the ability to deal with the land and make decisions on all activities on land as any private landowners. For example, at the moment, if the land were to be classified as community, and we are currently negotiating with National Park and Wildlife Services, we are unable to enter into any lease, or we're unable to do any activities until after we have a plan of management for the site. So in that example, basically the operational land classification enable us to deal with the land to enter into any dealing as appropriate and as financially viable to council. In other examples, it's not about the lease, but also about innovation approach in the use of the land in the future. We may relate the land to the vision of establishing the Planetary Health Initiative or Center of Excellence. However, through that process, the evolution of that process may come out with other innovative ideas that we may put on the land. Without being classified as operational land, that may limit our ability to make decisions in due course. With operational classification, we can make decisions in a business-like manner and in commercial-like manner.
Thank you. Councillor Brown, before I go any further, how many more questions do you have?
Look, I think I'm there. I might just
speak now.
Just say a few things. I think I've sort of understood.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. The clock will start and you have the call.
Yeah, I am going to support this, and the reason is because I feel that I
Sorry, Councillor Brown, if I could just ask, thank you. You can proceed.
Okay, I am supporting this because I feel that I supported us purchasing the land, and also given that the golf course is already no longer community, which I hadn't realised. I suppose I'm just saying I'm uneasy because whatever we may think, we're not going to be councillors forever, and I do have an anxiety because operational land can have really almost anything done to it. And so what we're planning now might not continue forever. So I have to say I have unease, but I am supporting it because I did support us buying it, and I understand that we now have to make that work. So I probably should have got across this a bit more beforehand, but so I'm going on trust that the staff have understood, are telling us this is what has to be done. And I suppose I would just say I wish we'd been spoken a little bit more to the community about it, just so that everyone feels comfortable, because I don't think that all the community have fully understood that we were going to be changing that notion of community land. But as I said, I do support the Planetary Health Leadership Centre as a concept, so I will support this.
Thank you. Any other councillors wish to speak or feel the need to? That not being the case, there's one matter before us. I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried unanimously. Thank you, councillors. One matter of urgency before me in the name of Councillor Brown. I will declare that it's urgent because of the current debate around grant funding. Councillors have a copy of that motion. Is it seconded?
I believe Councillor Schreiber is, yes.
I'll make that call, Councillor Brown. Thanks for assisting me. I can see his hand. Councillor Schreiber has the call. Councillor Brown.
So I spoke a little bit about this earlier.
Sorry, Councillor Brown. Councillor Schreiber, if you could go on mute. Councillor Brown has the call.
I spoke about this earlier, and it's really my experience with the second round of Blur, where suddenly we had this ferociously large criteria and applications and processes that had to be gone through for applications. And the council itself, I saw that the council staff are really stretched. There was a number of community groups, the Blackheath Area Neighbourhood Centre, Tooloid worked on one earlier with the council. Then we had the whole conglomerate group, the Treeline Lurline people, which is the heritage of National Trust, and the arborists and the Katoomba Chamber and who am I forgetting, Blue Mountains Tourism, all working together. Major work. And the council had been working on that for a year with us, helping since we voted to support the endeavours to get grant for Treeline Lurline. It's a very big game changer project to underground power and create Lurline Street as a wonderful precinct, active transport Treeline precinct linking the town and Echo Point. It's a fantastic project. It's had life in the council for 12 years since Terry Hamilton and Councillor Miles revived it from earlier. So there's a lot of work on that, but what happened toward the end is the council didn't have the resources. They were already trying to do some of the other applications, and you see that the staff are trying to do their day jobs and do these serious applications, which when they're not being pork barreled actually require a lot of work. And I saw how hard the community were working, how much was being contributed. But it became, I thought we really actually need for this, that the staff themselves have someone who is an experienced grant writer, can help different departments, can identify grants. I'm not just talking about bushfire ones, obviously, can identify grants and can really get the process going and do a lot of that hard work of putting together the arguments, the business cases, all the stuff that you have to do when you're doing the process properly. And I just feel that the investment to try for like a year or 6 months, but I was thinking a year contract, whether it's part-time or full-time, just to see
7th of October.
That how much can be done. And also, given that we're leaning hard on the communities, we've got community groups actually doing major grants for council assets, which is amazing, that they might also be able to get some assistance when they're doing something that's an approved application, not just anything they want, but that the council's agreed to. So it's really saying, let's, now we've had this opportunity, now this has all been called out, and there's no question that the second round of Blur was much, more bona fide in its processes, that the council, I believe, needs someone so that the staff aren't having to try and do that. Because really what happened in the last week of Treeline Lurline, at one point it was only endorsed by the council at the very, very last. It wasn't before then. People couldn't help, and it got a bit manic. And the community couldn't get the help, the information they needed at that point. And I could see the pressure it put everyone under. And I feel that we can be very successful in our grant applications if we have some professional expertise at not great cost for what can be millions that comes in. So that's the proposal.
Thank you, Councillor Brown. If you could go on mute. I think since the motion does reflect upon the capacity of the staff, it's appropriate for me to ask the CEO if she wishes to make any comments.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I will make some comments. I don't actually support the recommendation for establishing...
Sorry, CEO, if you could just hold one moment. Can I ask Councillor McGregor to go on mute, please? CEO has the call.
I don't support the establishment of a 12-month contract for an experienced grant writer. The way this matter of urgency is written, in my assessment, does imply that council staff currently lack the resources, experience and professional expertise to prepare effective grant applications. And in particular, what is mentioned is shovel-ready grant applications. I reject this imputation. In actual fact, I think council staff have a proven track record in very successfully preparing grants that have generally in the past in a wide range of diverse areas that a single grant officer couldn't cover all those areas. With the broad expertise of the council, we've been successful in many grants and partnered with community groups on projects that align with priorities of the council. The way the matter of urgency is written, of course, reflects on the recent 170 million shovel-ready process, and I do want to make a comment on that. Blue Mountain City Council has to date received just slightly over 2 million in financial assistance to support the recovery of the City of Blue Mountains. Of that, 1.3 million was a direct grant from the federal government. The state government has given us less than $1 million to support the recovery of a city that was so impacted, fire on 3 sides, 900,000 hectares or 80% of the Greater Blue Mountains World Heritage Area burned, more than 1 million in infrastructure damage. An estimated 2,600 job loss in gross turnover of 560 million, 20 homes destroyed, 36 outbuildings, 120 rural landholdings. And yet we got nothing from our package of 24 projects that were professionally put together in what was a very limited window of time we were given, with no criteria despite us asking for it and repeatedly wanting to get better guidance, never told that there was $1 million amount that the project should have met. We submitted a very professional package of 24 projects that would have supported critical social, economic and environmental recovery of the city. So I think the fact that we didn't get any of the 177 million does not have a lot to do with our grant writing or experience and skills or our resources. We have the resources, we have the skills, we have the experience. What we haven't got is the support of a state government to recognise the impact that this city has gone through and to provide us with a just amount of funding to support our recovery.
I thank the CEO for that contribution. Any other councillors wish to speak? Councillor Hollywood.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I do thank the CEO for giving that context. I have to say I'm a little bit shocked by this urgency motion, and even more shocked now that I've heard the CEO speak to it. The first thing I want to say is we as councillors employ the CEO to undertake and make decisions around the best operations of the council. And so from my perspective, this just doesn't make any sense. It's almost out of order. But on top of that, it's an absolute distraction, as the CEO has well put, from the fact that we put up grants that were considered, were well articulated, and were fundamentally ignored by the New South Wales government. That is the matter that is before us today and before us through this last week and more. And to me, to suggest that this is some kind of solution is really and truly going down the wrong path. I also want to say that what our council brings in an enormous amount of grants, and if you think about the city deals, funding and the projects that we are working on there, it's phenomenal. So, and I've always felt very strongly about that. Quite often, it's also one of those things where you think that, as it's sitting in our role as a council at arm's length from the operations, it might look like a straightforward solution, but in fact, the operations and the decisions of the operations of the council are best left to the CEO and the senior management team to make those decisions. And so, quite frankly, I will not be supporting this motion, which to me is an absolute and utter distraction from the real issues that we've been dealing with at this meeting tonight.
The seconder has indicated a wish to speak, so Councillor Schreiber has the call, and then I'll ask the Deputy Mayor to take the chair so that I may enter the debate. Other councillors, I've seen you all. Councillor Schreiber, then myself.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. There's no dispersion mentioned on staff.
Aspersion.
Yeah, sorry about that, but it's just, I believe we need to have an extra experience here to help the staff and help the CEO to make sure that we get these grants that we need to get. And like this one, whereabouts, if we would have had extra staff, extra expertise, would have probably been able to see where we never got told everything by the Deputy Premier. And I believe if we had extra help there to help the staff, because there's going to be a lot of grants flowing around, I'm sure, in the next few years, and I think it will just help. And I really do not think I think the staff have done a great job, and I feel as though if we extra help, we'll be always welcomed by them. Thank you.
The Deputy Mayor take the chair, please.
Yes, certainly, Mr Mayor, and you have the floor. Or the
Councillors will note that this year, this coming year, the council is delivering its biggest ever capital works program in the history of our city. Mr Parsons is visibly ageing by the day because he has to manage that large process and receive umpteen phone calls from me about how it's going. I apologise to him for that. Many of those projects are being funded through grant applications. In fact, this current term of council has been very successful in securing grant applications. Very noteworthy are the large number, millions of dollars worth of grants that have come into the city through City Deal. Councillors, I think it is unfortunate that this motion is raised tonight, because essentially the Deputy Premier's defence against the non-funding of Blue Mountain City Council yesterday was that our grant applications were not up to scratch. And I fear that he may take some comfort from this debate tonight, and I fear that it may unintentionally reflect poorly upon the stance we have taken. I think this council is very good at making grant applications, and I think this is a matter that ought to be debated, if at all, at another time. I'll resume the chair if it's okay with the Deputy Mayor.
you have the chair, Mr Mayor.
Thank you. I'll call Councillor Fernanda.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I won't be supporting this, and I'd like to have it on the record that I actually have the greatest faith in our staff's expertise and calibre in grant writing. All grants that are put through usually come to a briefing, and at that time, at a briefing, it's the councillor's opportunity to maybe question and to raise concerns if they feel that the grants may not be up to scratch. So I'm a bit baffled as to why Councillor Brown might feel that, our grant process isn't probably up to scratch where we need additional help or expertise, given that we've got those opportunities at the time to wear any concern. But I also think it is a bit of an insult to the hard work and the dedication and the tireless hours that our staff put into grant writing to receive the better services for our community. I sit in awe at those briefings and at the calibre and the extent of detail that are put into the grants to ensure that boxes are ticked. In regards to the funding from the bushfire grants, this wasn't any way due to any lack of expertise or knowledge or know-how of how to write grants. This was purely the state government putting their thumbs up and ignoring us. That's what that was. And I too share your fears that having such a motion might give some excuse and justification for the minister to think, well, maybe if one councillor or some councillors may think that the grants weren't up to scratch, that then we didn't meet a criteria when there really wasn't one. But as I said, I just wanted on the record that I want to thank the staff for their tireless efforts, their diligence and their calibre and expertise in writing the grants to always try to fight for the best type of services for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Fernanda. Councillor Fell has the call, then Councillor McGregor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'd just like to point out from, I know it's been a matter of some jollity at times that I invoke my many years of experience working in local government, largely in fields where a lot of the income to support various departments came through grant funding. It's a total...
Councillor Fell, it's just a question of how relevant the 1940s are to today, but please proceed.
I know, but if I may, now that we're in the marvellous world of electricity and of colour, it's just so exciting. It's a total misconception. It's buying into a common misapprehension, I think. Successful grant writing is not the result of getting a gun grant writer to write a fantastic submission and everybody's overwhelmed by this submission and then the money starts flowing. Those days are well and truly gone. That was what it was like in the 1970s and the 1980s. And yes, I was around in those days. It's not being unsuccessful. It's not a lack of expertise. We've got a whole heap of expertise in council. We've got a really talented staff. Councillor Fernanda mentioned that, and I can only echo that. What's needed is clear criteria and a commitment to follow those criteria. And that comes from the funding body. That comes from the state government in this case, generally, and of course from the federal government. And we are successful when that happens. We get a large proportion of our income through grants, but we can never be successful if we're being lured into some area of shifting goalposts and have made up guidelines that come after the applications have been received and get revealed through press releases and through responses to journalists when the basic inequality and the, I would hazard to say, corruption of the process of grant funding that we're going through at the moment is exposed. It's absolutely absurd, I think, to think that that can be addressed by getting a particular writer, some particular set of skills to address the problem of applying for grant funding. There isn't a problem applying for grant funding. There's a problem of grant allocation. There's a problem of developing guidelines, and there's a problem of running a fair and honest process. And that's what needs to be addressed, not to be sucked into some view that Barilaro can then espouse saying, oh, they could have got the money, but they just weren't good enough in what they wrote. It's just absolutely absurd. And I certainly will not support this motion. Thank you, Mr.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Fell. Councillor McGregor has the call.
Yes, Mr. Mayor, recent experience would suggest the best way to get grant funding is not to lodge an application at all, but rather to elect a pro-coalition government. I don't know whether that's Councillor Brown's motive, but I'm going to vote against it.
I actually, like, point of order on that, I don't appreciate anyone impugning my motives.
Councillor Brown, you can go on to mute. Councillor Brown, go on to mute.
I ask that the councillor withdraw that.
Councillor Brown, go on to mute, please. Councillor McGregor, you might withdraw the imputation as to Councillor Brown's motive. It might be your opinion that's how it looks, but you can't import a motive.
Terribly sorry, Mr. Mayor.
Yes.
I withdraw the motive.
Thank you, Councillor McGregor. That's withdrawn. Councillor McGregor and Councillor Brown on mute, please. Councillor McGregor on mute, please. Thank you. Councillor Hua has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, if I might be permitted, I think it was most remiss of me to, in my previous speech, to fail to mention, to overlook mentioning my enormous and deep and sincere gratitude to the work of my upper house colleague, the Honourable David Shoebridge, in exposing and certainly in publicising the work done by Michael West Media on this grant funding rorting, and I would like to put on record my commitment.
I'd like to ask you to draw yourself to the issue before us, Councillor Hall.
And the New Green team to ensuring the committee never forgets what's before us. Yeah, look, I wish to make my comments extremely brief. I wholeheartedly support the view of Councillor Fell. I think you've summarised the issue extremely succinctly. No amount of grant funding was going to get us any money out of this round when there's such a problem at the state government. And I would just with the greatest respect, like to suggest that perhaps the efforts of Councillor Brown would be better spent lobbying Councillor Schreiber to ensure that the state government gives us a fair go rather than supporting.
Point of order, can we just not have stupid comments from councillors?
There's no point of order, Councillor Brown.
I'm tired of childish.
There's no point of order, Councillor Brown.
Childish and immature comments.
Councillor Hoare has the call.
I've finished all I had to say, but I would note that I am gravely offended at Councillor Brown's insult.
Thank you, Councillor Hoare. It's noted. Councillor van der Clay, the Deputy Mayor, has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't be supporting this at all. I believe that staff are very capable of doing it. As you know, I've been involved with you with the City Steel process, where we got close on $7.5 million for projects right across the Blue Mountains. Andy Turner and Gary Parsons and the team put together a fantastic package. Of course, our CEO was very much involved in all of this, but also to a lot of other people, like for sporting field grants and so forth. We are about to open up the new clubhouse at Wentworth Falls, and we've got a few other places where we got grant funding, very capable, working with the community to get grants, grant funding together to get many, many projects underway. And so I can't see a problem with it. I've always managed to be able to talk to the staff about, let's put in an application. And look, not always do we get grant funding that we apply for. That's part of the course. But what happened just recently, that is absolutely ridiculous about the bushfire funding. And I'm so disappointed in that and what's happened there. But I totally support what we have in place at the present moment. And on top of that, I believe that this is a CEO's call. If the CEO felt that we needed someone to do that, she would employ that particular person to do that type of work. Is that not correct, CEO?
I won't ask the CEO to answer that question as you were in a speech, and I'll take that as a hyperbolic question, if that's all right. Councillor van der Clay, thank you for your contribution. Any other councillors wish to speak? There being none, the mover has the right of reply.
I understand. I can see that what's happened is everyone sees this as related to the last round, whereas I see it related to the current round. I'm responding to what I have just gone through in the last month or whenever with the latest round, and I saw it's nothing to do with the staff not having expertise. It's how you spend staff time. I mean, we have very expert staff, but when what I saw, for instance, when you have great community buy-in to get council assets, get grants for council assets to be upgraded or improved, or and the staff are then having to try and meet those needs, trying to get other grant applications done. Everyone's got a limit on their time, and it's not about whether they have the expertise or not, it's how you want to spend it. And there is a point where someone, a grant writer, can't do all the work. You've still got to have all the technical information and all of that, but there's a lot of putting together, there's a lot of making sure you've answered the questions. I've just been through it. I saw how much work, and there's a limit how many grants you can do. And what's what I'm saying. I mean, you're arguing two things. Oh no, we never get grants because it's always a rort. Oh, we get lots of grants, we're really successful. What I'm saying is I think we are successful, and I think we can get more successes, and I think we can do more. I mean, the reality is at a federal level, we have a federal electorate that's got 100 votes for which way it's going to go. So there is an interest in putting money in here, no question. It's the time to produce, I mean, to do a serious application is a lot of work. And I don't actually think that the staff, that when you have directors and managers being dragged into all that while they're trying to do their actual job of implementation, I think it's too much So for me, it's not to do with Barrelero. It's not to do with that at all. Shovel ready is really hard to get. Usually you have to go through a phase of a feasibility study. So you have to go 2 bites at it. Shovel ready is a high bar. If you can get through one without having to do a grant application for a feasibility and then do it, that's much more efficient. And that's the sort of thing I'm looking at. I mean, I think we'll come back to this. I'm happy, obviously you're all going to vote against it, fine. But this is actually not about staff not being experts. They are, but they don't want to be doing all the grant writing. That's my view. And you've got community members who can also be helped, and we could have a bigger return, because as we're all saying, oh well, we get lots of grants. Well, yeah, that's right, it's not always corrupt. Sometimes the processes are fair, and as I said, my feeling is that the second round of bushfire local economic recovery funds are going to be a bit fairer, thanks to David Shoebridge's work and the Labor support he got. So that's what it's about. It's about resourcing. I'm very disappointed that the General Manager seems to see this as some sort of attack. It's not. It's quite the opposite. I saw it as something that would get us a bigger return than the cost of a grant writer, even if they're not full-time. I believe it's something that's worth trying, but it can be looked at. I think it will be looked at again, because I think for such a big organisation, we do need it. There's so many opportunities out there. Thank you.
Item matter before us, I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? I declare the motion lost, with Councillor Christie abstaining for family to attend to a child. So the matter is, and I'll go around the table so it's clear. All those in favour? Councillors Schreiber and Brown. All those against? Councillors Greenhill, Fernanda, Hollywood, McGregor, Miles, Fell, Hoare, Vanderclay and Bowling. Did I miss anybody out? And with Councillor Christie abstaining because he's attending to family. I declare the motion lost. Motion to close the meeting. It's moved Councillor Vanderclay, seconded Councillor Hollywood. I don't suppose anyone wishes to speak to closure. They don't. It's one matter before us that the meeting is closed. I'll put it. All those in favour? Against? Declare it carried. And I wish you all good night.
Good night.
Thank you, Toby. You can close the meeting.
Good night, all.